Hello bachcho, let's read the question. So the question says, read the passage given below. The Battle of Chancellorsville, one of the most famous battles of the Civil War, took place in Virginia in the spring of 1863. For months, two armies had been stacked out on the opposite banks of a narrow river. The Confederate troops were led by perhaps the most revered military tactician in American history, General Robert E. Lee. The Union soldiers were led by Fighting Joe Hooker. In appearance, personality, and lifestyle, these men were nearly perfect opposites. Lee, an older man in poor health with grey beard, had a somber, measured demeanor. Hooker was a blond, strapping young man whose vanity over his appearance was but one aspect of his egotism. Whereas Lee was devout and principled, Hooker was known as rollicking enjoyment. Despite the fact the Confederacy had won last four major battles, and the Union soldiers were famished, exhausted, and demoralized, Hooker proclaimed, "My plans are perfect, and when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I shall have none." Why, aside from a propensity for narcissism, was Hooker so confident? Hooker had used spies, analysts, and even hot air balloons to compile a vast amount of intelligence about Lee's army. He had discerned, for example, that Lee had only 61,000 men to Hooker's own 134,000. Buoyed by his superior numbers, Hooker covertly moved 70,000 of his men 15 miles up and across the river, and then ordered them to sneak back down to position themselves behind Lee's army. In effect, Hooker had cut off the Confederate soldiers in front and behind. They were trapped. Satisfied with his advantage, Hooker became convinced that Lee's only option was to retreat to Richmond, thus assuring a Union victory. Yet Lee, despite his disadvantages of both numbers and position, did not retreat. Instead, he moved troops into position to attack. Union soldiers who tried to warn Hooker that Lee was on the offensive were dismissed as cowards. Having become convinced that Lee had no choice but to retreat, Hooker began to ignore reality. When Lee's army attacked the Union soldiers at 5 p.m., they were eating supper. Completely unprepared for battle, they abandoned their rifles and fled as Lee's troops came shrieking out of the brush. Against all odds, Lee won the Chancellorsville, and Hooker forces withdrew in defeat. Now, this is a graph of the casualties at the battle. Now, on the basis of understanding of the passage, answer the following question. In paragraph 3, the author quotes Hooker as saying, "My plans are perfect, and when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I shall have none." The author most likely includes the quote in order to option A, portray Hooker as a merciless general who was compelled by hatred of Lee. Option B, provide an example of the way language has been changed since 1863. Option C, reveal that Hooker was a deeply religious man in spite of his lifestyle. Option D, foreshadow Hooker's defeat at the hands of Lee's army. And option E, demonstrate Hooker's belief in his own infallibility. Now बच्चों, पहले क्वेश्चन को आंसर करने से पहले we'll get to know कि what passage is about. ठीक है, पैसेज क्या है? ये पैसेज है बच्चों बैटल ऑफ चांसेलर्सविल के बारे में. ठीक है, बहुत फेमस बैटल है सिविल वॉर का, जो वर्जीनिया में था. 1863 में ये बैटल लड़ी गई थी. ठीक है, दो आर्मी के बीच में लड़ी गई थी. कॉन्फेडरेट ट्रूप्स जो लीड कर रहे थे जनरल रॉबर्ट ई ली, एंड यूनियन सोल्जर्स जो लीड कर रहे थे जो हुकर. अब इन दोनों जर्नल्स के और इन दोनों चीफ्स की जो पर्सनालिटी बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट थी, अपीयरेंस बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट था, लाइफस्टाइल बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट था. ठीक है, तो उसके बारे में हमें बताया गया. ठीक है, अब जो हुकर था, ही वॉज वेरी ओवर कॉन्फिडेंट, और इसके वजह से वो वॉर हारे थे. और उसी के बारे में पूरा बताया कि कैसे ली ये वॉर अपने डिसएडवांटेजेस बोथ नंबर्स एंड पोजीशंस को लेके भी जीता, सिर्फ अपने दिमाग की वजह से और हुकर के ओवर कॉन्फिडेंस की वजह से ली ये बैटल जीत गया. तो अब यहाँ पे अगर मैं बात करूं, जो पैराग्राफ 3 में हमने यूज किया हुआ है कि माई प्लान्स आर परफेक्ट एंड व्हेन आई स्टार्ट टू कैरी देम आउट, मे गॉड हैव मर्सी ऑन बॉबी ली, फॉर आई शैल हैव नन. ठीक है, ये कोट हुकर ने बोला था. और ये क्यों बोला था? पहला ऑप्शन देख लें, पोर्ट्रे हुकर एज मर्सीलेस जनरल हु वाज कंपेल्ड बाय हिज हेटेड ऑफ ली. ये कहीं हद तक ट्रू है, बट ऐसा नहीं है कि वो मर्सीलेस जनरल था या उसमें बहुत हेट्रेड थी फॉर ली, ऐसा नहीं. ऑप्शन बी, प्रोवाइड एन एग्जांपल ऑफ द वे लैंग्वेज हैज चेंज्ड सिंस 1863. सो इट डजंट रियली मेक एनी सेंस, सो वी विल रिजेक्ट A and B. Option C, reveal that Hooker was a deeply religious man in spite of his lifestyle. So God का नाम लेने से यहाँ पे ये establish नहीं हो रहा है कि Hooker was a religious man. So we'll also reject this. Option D, foreshadow Hooker's defeat at the hands of Lee's army. बिल्कुल नहीं, ये कहीं से ये नहीं दर्शा रहा है कि हुकर की डिफीट हो गई है at the hands of Lee's army. और ऑप्शन ई जो है that be the correct option, which is demonstrate Hooker's belief in his own infallibility. अब बच्चों, इनफैलिबिलिटी का मतलब क्या होता है? आप सोचिए, ये सेंटेंस को हम दोबारा पढ़ेंगे. इनफैलिबिलिटी, डेमोन्स्ट्रेट हुकर्स बिलीफ इन हिज ओन इनफैलिबिलिटी. इनफैलिबिलिटी का बच्चों ये मतलब होता है कि इट इज बेसिकली इनकेपेबल ऑफ एरर, केपेबल ऑफ एनी एरर, कि वो एरर कर ही नहीं सकता. ठीक है, वो कर ही नहीं सकता क्योंकि हुकर के वो ये अपने ऊपर बिलीफ था कि वो तो कोई एरर कर ही नहीं सकता. दैट्स व्हाई ही सेड दिस कोट. सो द करेक्ट ऑप्शन वुड बी ऑप्शन नंबर E. I hope you understood it well. Best of luck.